In 479 BC, a woman was carried through the corridors of the Persian royal palace, and the guards who watched her pass had watched her walk in whole just hours before. She was not a criminal, not a slave, not a prisoner of war. She was royalty, one of the most protected women on earth, and she had done nothing wrong. If you think you know this story, you don't, because the version most people carry was built by movies and textbooks that had every reason to leave this part out. What actually happened inside that palace was not the story of a monster. It was the story of a system, and systems are more frightening than monsters, because monsters are rare and systems are everywhere. To understand how a woman who did everything right ended up being carried through those corridors, you need to understand what happened to a king who could not accept what he had become. In 480 BC, Xerxes launched the largest military invasion the ancient world had ever seen. Over 200,000 men, at a time when Sparta's entire professional military class numbered fewer than 10,000. He was not invading Greece, he was erasing it. He built pontoon bridges across the Hellespont, and when a storm destroyed the first set, he ordered the water itself whipped and branded with hot irons. Everyone calls that madness, but it was not madness. It was theatre, because Xerxes ruled an empire whose obedience depended entirely on the perception that he was not an ordinary man. Then came Salamis, where the Greek fleet lured his navy into a narrow strait too tight to maneuver. Persian ships rammed each other, and the Greeks tore the fleet apart while Xerxes watched from a golden throne he had placed on the hillside deliberately, so every soldier would know the king was watching. That same throne forced him to sit perfectly still while his empire burned on the water. He left. He never returned to Greece, never launched another Western campaign, and what the textbooks never ask is what happens to a king like that afterward. Because in the Achaemenid system, the king was the chosen instrument of Ahura Mazda, the god of truth and order, which meant military failure was not just embarrassing, it was theological evidence that the god had withdrawn his favour. Nobody said this out loud, but everyone adjusted. For the remaining 14 years of his reign, Xerxes launched no major military operations, retreating into the internal theatre of the court, because a king who loses the external stage always tries to reclaim authority on the internal one, and the internal stage was a palace full of people whose safety depended entirely on his approval. One person caught his attention. His brother Macystes was not a minor figure. He had commanded troops during the Greek campaign, governed the strategically critical province of Bactria, and was royal by blood and military by career. He was also married, and Xerxes wanted his wife. This is not interpretation, it's recorded directly in Book 9 of Herodotus' Histories. Now imagine you are that woman. You are standing in a room with the most powerful man alive, and he wants something from you and you say no, knowing full well what he is capable of, and you say it anyway. The king of the largest empire in human history hears the word no from a woman whose name history will not even bother to record. He does not force the issue, not because he has a conscience, but because her husband has troops, regional authority, and the loyalty of a militarily critical province, and taking her by force would be an act of war against his own brother. So he does something worse. He gets patient. He arranges for his eldest son, Crown Prince Darius, to marry Artainte, the daughter of Macystes, on the surface routine dynastic maintenance, the kind nobody questions, but the actual purpose is proximity, because with Artainte inside the palace, the entire family of Macystes now has legitimate reasons to be near Xerxes that no one can challenge. He has engineered access without anyone seeing the mechanism. This is not passion. This is calculation dressed as tradition. Subscribe to Vile History if you are new, because what comes next is worse than you are expecting. Then proximity does what proximity always does. It rearranges intentions, and Xerxes stopped wanting the mother and started wanting Artainte, his son's wife, his brother's daughter, his own daughter-in-law. The affair began, and it continued, and during one of their encounters Xerxes swore a royal oath that she could ask for anything, and he would grant it. In the Achaemenid system, this was not a social gesture. It invoked Ahura Mazda directly, and breaking it was an act of cosmic disorder that unmade the theological foundation of the king's own authority. He expected gold, property, and estate. Artainte asked for the robe he was wearing. Stop. That robe had been hand-woven by Queen Amestris as a personal gift to the king, and the entire court knew this garment. And when Xerxes wore it, the message to every person in that palace was the queen made this and we are unified. And if Artainte wore it, The queen's own creation on another woman's body was not a trophy. It was a public confession with no interpretation available that did not destroy someone. Xerxes offered cities, unlimited gold, an army under her personal command. She refused everything. Only the robe. Either she was reckless or she understood exactly what she was doing. Because as long as the affair was secret, she was disposable. But the moment it became visible, she became a fact the court had to accommodate. He handed over the robe because a king could override a law, a king could commute a sentence. But in Persia, a king could not override a Hura Mazda. The robe changed hands, and the countdown began. Amestris saw it on Artente, and she did not scream, did not confront, did not go to Xerxes. She looked at a calendar. Amestris was the daughter of Otanes, one of the 7 nobles who had placed Darius I on the throne, and her political position predated her marriage and could not be removed. Her power rested on one principle. The queen cannot be publicly humiliated without visible consequence, because in a court full of competing women, a queen's authority exists only as long as everyone believes that challenging her is dangerous. She did not feel betrayed when she saw that robe. She identified a threat, and then she made the decision that reveals more about how power actually operates than almost anything else in the ancient record. She did not target Artente. She targeted the mother, the wife of Mesistes, the woman who had refused the king and done nothing. Once a year, Persian custom required the king to grant any request made during the royal birthday feast before the assembled court. Refusing would be a public violation of the ritual structure that legitimized the monarchy itself. During the feast, before the nobles, the priests, the military commanders, the provincial governors, Amestris made her request. She asked for the wife of Mesistes to be handed over to her, and every person in that room understood what that meant. Xerxes begged her privately, proposed alternatives. She did not move. He then went to Mesistes directly without explaining anything, and urged him to divorce his wife voluntarily, offering his own daughter as a replacement. The most powerful man on earth was offering his own child as a substitute, desperately trying to move the target before the weapon landed, and he could not say why. Mesistes refused, because he loved his wife and had no idea what was happening. Xerxes, trapped between a ritual he could not violate, a wife who had outmaneuvered him, and a brother who would not cooperate, gave consent. What was done to the wife of Mesistes was systematic. Herodotus is specific. Body parts were severed, targeted at the features that communicated identity and status. She was not killed. She was returned, carried back through the same corridors past the same guards who had watched her walk in whole, because the purpose was not only to destroy one woman, but to install a message in the mind of every person in that palace that required no words because it was written on a human body. This is what happens. When Mesistes saw his wife, he gathered his sons and turned east toward Bactria to raise the province in open revolt, and for the first time the private corruption of one king had become an imperial security crisis. Xerxes did not send diplomats, he sent cavalry. Mesistes and his sons were intercepted before they reached Bactria and killed, all of them. An entire branch of the royal bloodline erased not by enemies and not in battle, but by a sequence of decisions that started with one man hearing the word no and deciding he could not live with it. Now imagine you are a noble watching this, and you have staked your family's future on the stability of this throne, and you have just watched the king manipulated by his own traditions, unable to protect his own brother, ordering the execution of his own bloodline over a personal scandal he created. You're asking yourself one question: am I safe? For 14 years that question circulated through the palaces at Susa and Persepolis. In 465 BC, the answer arrived. Xerxes was assassinated in his own bedchamber by Artabanus, commander of the royal bodyguard, the man whose entire function was to keep the king alive while he slept, assisted by a court eunuch who controlled access to the king's private chambers. Not rebels, not foreigners. The men who dressed him stood beside him, and watched in silence while he slept, had simply stopped seeing a king worth protecting. The wife of Mesistes did everything a person is supposed to do to stay safe inside a powerful system. She followed the rules. She refused the king. She stayed loyal. The system destroyed her anyway. So the question that will follow you after this video ends is not what went wrong in 479 BC. The question is what system exists in your world right now where doing everything right still cannot protect you, and whether you would even know it if you were already inside it. Leave her name in the comments, because history never gave her one, and she deserves at least that much. Subscribe to Vile History. There are more stories like this one, and they are worse.